All right, so this lesson is going to be on dividing polynomials. So in the factor theorem, but today we're just going to be doing the division by long division, and then tomorrow we'll do the factor theorem and synthetic division. So in Algebra 2, I know that you learned synthetic division, and depending on who your Algebra 2 teacher was, you may have learned long division. So I'm just going to go ahead and pretend like nobody learned long division polynomials last year. So you did learn long division in elementary school or middle school. So if we were going to divide 662 by 21, think about what the first step is. So your first step is to do the division step, is the divide step. And you don't just try to divide 21 into the whole number. What you typically do, I think, what you did back then, is just think about how many times 2 will go evenly in, or just divide into 6. And that answer is 3. So that's the division step. All right, so we're going to also do that with polynomials. So to set it up, what you're dividing by is going to go in the front. That's called the divisor. What you're dividing into is going to go underneath. That's the dividend. All right, and then let's go ahead and do that divide step. So same thing, like we didn't focus on the whole 21 or the whole 662. We're not going to focus on the whole thing. When we do the divide step, we're just going to focus on the 6x cubed and the 2x. And so you're going to, what I do is I ask myself, what do I multiply 2x by to get 6x cubed? All right, and then the answer to that question is going to be 3x squared. So you multiply 2 by 3 to get the 6. And then this is the x. If you multiply it by x squared, you're adding the exponents, and that gives you the cubed. All right, sorry, I'm going to color code this. All right, so let's go back to this guy over here. And so try to think about what the next step is. All right, your next step is to multiply. And on your multiply step, you don't just focus on the 2, you multiply the whole thing by 3. All right, so you do 3 times 1 is 3. And then 3 times 2 is 6. All right, and then we'll do the same thing here. We're going to take that 3x squared. We're going to multiply this whole thing by 3x squared, sorry. And so 3x squared times negative 1 is negative 3x squared. And it is super important that you line up your like terms. And then 3x squared times 2x is going to give you the 6x cubed. All right. Now, our next step, if we go back to long division with just numbers, is to subtract. So subtracting numbers is way easier than what we have to do when we subtract these polynomials. So we have to be really careful that we subtract both of these. And so what I like to do is actually change the sign and then circle it. So change the sign and then circle it. That way you make sure you're subtracting both. Whenever we do 7x squared plus, no, it's now plus 3x squared, that's going to be 10x squared. And then these need to subtract away. If they don't, then that means you did something wrong. And so you have to go back and see what happened, but those definitely should cancel or subtract to 0. All right, let's go back to the the numbers that we divided. The next step is to bring down the 2. So over here, we're going to bring down the minus 9x. And then we're going to repeat. You just do it all over again. So go back to the divide step. This time, we only care about 2x and 10x squared. And so you ask yourself, what do you multiply 2x by to get 10x squared? And that is going to be 5x. And since it's a positive, we do plus. All right, and then we take 5x and we multiply it by -1. And that's going to be -5x. We line up our like terms. All right, and then we take 5x and we multiply it by 2x. That's going to be our 10x squared. All right, and then we're ready for our subtract step. That means that we are going to change that positive 10 to a negative. Change the -5 to a positive. All right, and then -9x plus 5x is going to give you -4x. And then we bring down. And then we do it again. All right, so you're asking yourself, what do you multiply 2x by to get -4x? And that is going to be -2. All right, and then we'll do the multiply step. -2 times -1 is +2. -2 times 2x is -4x. Right? And then we have the subtraction step where we change both of those signs. And this time, when we do our subtraction step, we get a remainder of 0. All right. Now, sometimes we do get a remainder, and we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so let's look at example 2. We're going to go ahead and set it up by putting the divisor in front, drawing the division box, and putting the dividend underneath. We're going to do the divide step. Now, if you're having a hard time when I say, what do you multiply x squared by to get 9x cubed? If that doesn't make sense to you, you could actually go over to the side and divide. So you would take 9x cubed and divide it by x squared. All right, so it's basically 9 divided by 1, which is just going to be 9. And then you're going to subtract those exponents. And so 3 minus the 2 is just going to be x to the first. Now, I really like to keep my like terms lined up. And so that 9x I would put up here. Right. And then if you like doing it the other way, you ask yourself, what do you multiply x squared by to get 9x cubed? And that is going to be 9x. So however you like to think about it is fine, but you do need to find a way that makes sense to you. All right, then we're going to do the multiplication step. So we're going to take 9x, we're going to multiply it by x squared, and that's going to give you 9x cubed. I did it in a different order this time. It's okay, I'm sorry. Then we're going to take 9x and multiply it by 2, and that's going to give you 18x. Now be careful. You have to put it under the other x term. You don't put it under the x squared term. So this x squared term is skipped for now. Then when I do this subtraction step, the 9x cubes do cancel out, but that 4x squared is going to need to drop down. All right, and then it's 8x minus 18x is negative 10x. And then we're going to bring down the 6. All right, and then we're going to do it again. So you have options. You can ask yourself, what do you multiply x squared by to get 4x squared? And the answer would just be 4. Or you could go over to the side and take 4x squared and divide it by x squared. And you're just going to get 4. All right, and then we're ready for the multiply step, where we're going to take 4, we're going to multiply it by both of these. All right, so 4 times 2 is going to give you 8, and you do need to line it up under the constant, under the number that doesn't have an x with it. And then take 4 and multiply it by x squared, and you get 4x squared. You line it up under the x squared term. And then we're ready to subtract. All right, when we subtract that, minus 10x basically is 0 is subtracting from it, so it's still going to be negative 10x. And then 6 minus 8 is going to be minus 2. All right, and then this is the first one we've done with a remainder. And so what you do with that remainder is it gets divided by the divisor. All right, so this whole thing represents your answer. Okay, I'm going to do one more with you, and I'm going to say the same things. Hopefully it's all kind of coming together. All right, so on example 3, we're going to set it up. All right, and then we're going to go through all the steps. So the first step is the divide step, where you either ask yourself, what do you multiply 3x by to get 3x cubed, which is going to be x squared, or you go over to the side and you do the division. All right, so 3 divided by 3 is 1, and then we subtract. 3 minus 1 is going to be x squared. All right, then we'll do the multiply step, where we're going to do x squared times 2 is going to be 2x squared. And then we'll do x squared times 3x is going to be 3x cubed. All right, then we'll do the subtract step, where we're going to change both signs. Okay, sorry, there was an announcement. So the 3x cubes cancel out, and then it's negative 7x squared minus 2x squared is going to give you negative 9x squared. And then we bring down, and then we do it again. So you ask yourself, what do you multiply 3x by to get negative 9x squared? And that's going to be negative 3x. And then you multiply negative 3x times 3x. is going to be negative 9x squared. Negative 3x times 2 is going to be negative 6x. You might get nervous. I got nervous for a second, but it's going to all be fine. All right, then we're going to change the signs. The negative 9x squared subtracts away, and then we have 6x plus 6x, which is 12x. And then we bring down, and then we have to do it one more time. And so you ask yourself, what do you multiply 3x by to get 12x? And that answer is just 4. Right? And then you multiply 4. I keep changing order. It doesn't matter what order you do it, but I'm just going to do 4 times 3x is 12x. 4 times 2 is 8. And then I'm going to subtract by changing both signs, and this one is nice because I get a remainder of 0 again. Alright, now you might be wondering why we have to learn long division, because if you remember synthetic division, it was way shorter, but it's because not every division problem for polynomials can be done by synthetic division. Synthetic division is very limited. And so none of the ones we did today would have been able to do by synthetic division. So that's why you do need to learn long division, because sometimes it's necessary to be able to do the division problem. All right. And so you all are going to have an assignment with just a few problems to do. So make sure you get those done.